Dr. Oosterhuis. Bang! Okay, Dr. Oosterhuis, thank you for your time today. Just wanted to ask you your views on the COVID situation at the moment, and where you think that we should be going, and where does it look like we're going from your perspective. So can I just ask you to share your credentials with us today?
I'm an Australian doctor, trained at Sydney University, and subsequently became specialised in anaesthetics, and I've done quite a few years of critical care, working in the public and private system.
Excellent. What do you think that is happening at the moment in this country around the COVID situation? What's your general feeling?
My feeling is that our policy is still stuck in some sort of time warp of last year, and none of our policymakers are taking into account what we're seeing overseas, particularly in Israel, which was the first country to have high rates of vaccination. But all the countries that have started their vax campaigns before us are now in trouble. In Israel, the Delta variant doesn't seem to be, the Pfizer vaccine doesn't seem to be protecting against the Delta variant. So it doesn't, on one side you've got, you're seeing evidence of vaccine failure and vaccine harm, and on the other side you've got examples in places like India where they've crushed the hospitalizations and the cases with very low vaccine rates using repurposed drugs. So I got in trouble with APRA and the medical board for talking about repurposed drugs, but they completely, unlike Israel and the highly vaccinated countries which are having problems with COVID, these other examples through Africa, South America, like I say, Mexico and India, tell us a totally different story, that COVID's controllable, containable. New Delhi, once the Indian medical institutes recommended ivermectin, they crushed their caseload by 97% in 5 weeks. I'd like to see us do it, but we're so far from that at the moment in Australia, because they want us to do the opposite. They want us to follow the US and European model from last year, now that we've got the Delta virus. And that model involves people getting no treatment, no prevention, waiting for them to go blue, and then come to the hospital once they're terribly damaged by the virus. And often they're irretrievable. They can be irretrievable at that stage. And we should do early treatment.
How do you explain the failure of that vaccine in Israel?
Well, it's not a traditional vaccine. It's a gene therapy approach to vaccination, which has never been rolled out on a global scale, let alone a country scale, let alone a large number scale, and it doesn't provide the same range of it's got the advantage you can develop it quickly and change the targets very quickly, but the targets are very narrow, whereas the immunity you get from natural exposure isn't a tiny part of the organism, it's every part of it, or multiple parts of it, and many more proteins to protect you develop from that, from exposure to the full antigen. And that's what we were used to when people say vaccination. You get a jab and you don't have to think about it.
So it's not a silver bullet?
It's not even a silver bullet. It's failed. Where I think early treatment is a silver bullet. It's much closer to what I would consider a silver bullet. It's crushed the virus, but the vaccine hasn't. And I don't even understand, given what I'm seeing in terms of harm from the vaccine, that we should even be using it, let alone talking about boosters, let alone mandating it. I don't understand any of that. I think it's time to say it's a failed approach, and we have to do something else.
Talk about the role that Big Pharma plays in all this, as you see it.
Well, I mean, you've got to wonder why the insanity, what are the incentives and motives behind the people making these decisions. And we know that corruption and influence from the big pharma is massive, and big money buys influence, including with our politicians, because there is money to be made. There's a whole huge COVID industry that's been set up, and you wouldn't want to spoil that with ending it with early treatment.
So they wouldn't make money from the early treatment, and
no, there's no money in any of the things I'm talking about: vitamin D, zinc, quercetin, melatonin. No.
And what about the mutation of the virus and how it gets around the vaccine action?
Well, there was always going to be a problem because respiratory viruses do evolve. So you need. It's hard to just. Vaccines are not a great approach for respiratory viruses because they keep changing. Like with the flu vaccine, you don't get one shot and it's recovered. You're always in a race against the antigen. So it was never a good approach in the first place, even assuming that you could find the antigens, update it, make the vaccine in time. By the time you get it distributed, it's moved on. You know, it's like they've got into a losing arms race against the virus, and I want them to break that cycle, and I believe we can by following the example of doctors that I follow, like Pierre Crory of the FLCCC, FLCCC.net, and follow their protocols. There's lots of doctors who have sorted this. We've got it sorted medically. We've got the solution, but the politicians and the bureaucrats, and not just them, but also the social media giants and mainstream media. There are a lot of forces to collude, that are colluding actively to censor this message, and censorship kills.
Can you talk about how deadly this virus is that the whole world is afraid of at the moment versus the vaccine or anything else that we've experienced?
Well, it's very clear that people have a disproportionate sense of risk. When you ask them what, there's really one question, one key variable, age. The risk is very, very low until you get into the 60s, 70s, and then it goes almost exponentially up in terms of risk. But even those like 97-year-old with comorbidities, without treatment, have overall 99.5% chance of surviving this virus. So that's not, and remember that anyone younger has an even lower risk. So we're getting much closer to 99.9, effectively 100% for children, and they're talking about vaccinating them with this failed approach. And my fear is that they will be not only suffer side effects and reactions, but they will damage their immune system effectively, cripple their immune system with this approach, and will be hooked up to a lifelong subscription model, which big business loves. But it's going to be I fear it's going to be a disaster.
Is that the aim of the exercise, is to get us on a lifetime subscription with the vaccine?
I think that's where the economic incentives are aligned, and that seems to be what's driving our policy and our government, because they seem to be one tier below the big vaccine companies seem to have more say in what our governments do than the governments. So the shots they're calling.
Well, at the beginning of October now of 2021, it seems that the deaths from the official number of deaths resulting from the COVID are in Australia about 420. The deaths resulting from the vaccinations are more, around 560, and the deaths from suicide in Australia are around more than 3,000 a year. So can you talk about how
Well, the government never did a risk-benefit analysis of the harms of the lockdowns. You know, they went so far beyond the 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and it's a form of torture and abuse on the population to even contemplate going that far. It's a disproportionate response, and the harms have been on so many levels: psychological, economic, social, immunological. I actually think the longer people stay apart from one another and 6 feet to flatten the curve for all eternity will leave us isolated and will degrade our immune system, because we need that contact. We need to be constantly updating our immune system and teaching it. The longer we lock down, the more we become vulnerable, immunologically, but also psychologically, and so many. That's suicide increases and the suicidal ideation in kids. It's a tragedy, and they're not looking at the harms either from the vaccines or their policies. If you factored in the harms that we see now, you would stop them all immediately.
What are some positive results that we've seen in other countries from a different model introduced to cope with this?
Well, they get back to their life. You know, it's not about medicine or a disease. The disease appears to be the decision makers and the bureaucrats, because medically there's no basis for the QR codes and the lockdowns and the contact tracing, and there was a worse outbreak of influenza in terms of mortality in 2017, and we didn't shut down society and turn it into a dystopian totalitarian biosecurity police state. So it doesn't make sense in terms of logic or facts. So we're dealing with something different.
Do we have an example overseas where they've actually gone for the early treatment versus the vaccine?
Well, a lot of the third world can't afford the vaccine, so you can see that they've, out of necessity, India was having problems. They were running out of oxygen, hospitals were overrun. But once they took that approach, it ended, and you see that over and over again in the epidemiological data, that where a country introduced widespread and easy access to effective early treatment, they crushed it within weeks.
So if you were in charge if you replaced Mr. Hazard at the moment, what would you introduce tomorrow to help everyone in Australia?
All right. Well, the key part of, you want me to talk about early treatments? Well, I believe that ivermectin appears to be is the most versatile part of the ingredient of most cocktails, because it can be used as prophylaxis, early treatment, later treatment, and even for treating long COVID. It has activity in multiple stages. And it's effective not just against COVID, but other RNA viruses. It has a very good safety profile because it's been around for many decades and is unequivocally safe, which is more than you can say about any of these rushed through new big pharma treatments. Like remdesivir has negligible benefit, if any, but does produce liver disease, liver failure, renal failure, and that's what we're giving. That's what they're giving in Sydney hospitals. Professor McCullough said, "You're better off staying at home and getting effective treatment than going to the hospital and getting dangerous treatment."
What effects are the vaccines having at the moment on people in terms of asymptomatic transmission versus the unvaccinated?
Asymptomatic transmission has never been a driver of this illness. It's not a driver of previous respiratory illnesses. It's this whole idea that people can asymptomatically transmit a disease who don't subsequently develop symptoms a day later or 2 days later. No, they're saying is an excuse to lock up healthy people. You know, it's a ruse because it's not a driver of infection, so it's not based on evidence.
So vaccinating the whole population would not stop lockdowns?
Lockdowns have got nothing to do with, they're unrelated because they're purely a political maneuver. But the vaccinations will not allow us to achieve herd immunity and end the virus. So in fact, it's doing the opposite. It's having a type of effect like antibiotic resistance, where you overuse treatment and then you get subsequent resistance and then finally failure of it. We've overused, in my opinion, and we've overused something which is much more toxic than we initially were led to believe. I'm talking about the vaccine. The vaccine is showing high, even on Pfizer's data, 6-month data, which is the only data we're ever going to get from them because they broke the trial at 6 months and they injected the control group. Even on that data, Steve Kirsch pointed out recently at the FDA VRB pack that more people were dying from all-cause mortality in the treatment group than in the control group. And they only focus on a slight difference in COVID infections, which is less than a small effect, which is now basically greatly diminished. But for every life saved from COVID, he's found that you're losing around 6 to 7 lives from other things, all cause, strokes, heart attack.
After the vaccine?
Neurological, a whole multitude. So I think we've got enough data and enough suggestion of fraud that we should be stopping. And that's fine because we have the tools to protect ourselves and prevent hospitals being overrun. And if natural immunity that we'll get from the virus, if we treat it and we get symptomatic, is robust, durable, and long-lasting. So unlike why go for a pharma subscription model of dubious safety and dubious effect when you're better off relying on Mother Nature plus the treatment.
Yes, because at the moment we're told just keep getting vaccinated, and once we reach a particular number,
we won't achieve herd immunity because these vaccines are not sterilizing. They don't provide sterilizing immunity. So it means that they don't stop you getting infected. They don't stop you passing it on. They reduce your symptoms, but that actually paradoxically is means that people can be walking around, and this is what we're discovering, with very high viral loads in their nose and mouth, higher than the previous strains, and they're now infecting other vaccinated people and non-vaccinated people, almost in a more super spreader-like fashion in some people because of the inadequate IgA antibodies.
That's the vaccinated people.
Yes. Yeah,
So they're more dangerous to us than the unvaccinated.
yes.
As in terms of pre or asymptomatic.
Well, a lot of Gert van der Bosch would focus on the population level effects rather than everyone's. What does it mean to me? What does it mean to me personally? But a lot of these things are population-based arguments that you drive evolution of variants and you drive this. It's an evolutionary argument which seems to be borne out by events.
So talk about the early treatment more. You mentioned ivermectin. What else can people do before getting exposed to COVID and afterwards?
Well, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and that's in multiple protocols. Vitamin D, probably number one, which you can get from sun exposure, or you can get from dietary supplementation, and I recommend both. We have zinc, which is probably the next on my list of low-hanging fruit, plus quercetin, melatonin.
And what kind of natural fruits can people take to get their body loaded up with these goodies?
Well, quercetin is in food, and you. Last year I was making my own homemade elderberry syrup, and because I'd known that there were studies of elderberries and viral as an antiviral, but it is a fruit which is very high in quercetin. There's vegetables like capers where it's very concentrated. Red onions are not bad. The berries are a good source because it's pigmented food, you know. But the berries like blueberries are a good source.
And zinc. What's rich in zinc that people can take?
Zinc is often got that reputation of foods that are like aphrodisiacs, like oysters and seafood. Often you'll see that they've had that reputation because of the high zinc. I'm not saying every aphrodisiac has got high zinc, but yes, mainly main source I focus on is certain seafoods.
And vitamin D, of course, from the sun. So if we get daily sun, if we get weekly doses of
at the right time of year, at the right time of day, for the right length of time, yes. And there's an app called D-Minder that you can calculate where you are on the planet and what season it is and what's your appropriate exposure. But if we could fix the widespread vitamin D deficiency status, we could crush a lot of morbidity and mortality every winter that we've been ignoring.
And is ivermectin available easily to people?
Not at all. Not at all. Professor Thomas Borody has a protocol that he's the Nobel Prize winner who's sorted the problem of peptic ulcer disease with a multimodal therapy to kill Helicobacter and cure ulcer disease. And he won the Nobel Prize. He found suggested a triple therapy last year with ivermectin and zinc and an antibiotic, and he was right, but no one's listened to him. And there were doctors who were prescribing his his therapy, which includes ivermectin, getting it to be made up in compounding pharmacies, because the type of ivermectin that we stock is not ideal for the dose. They don't provide enough tablets for most people to treat a course of COVID. So, but that's all been stopped. Now the TGA has said that doctors are not allowed to prescribe ivermectin off-label. So they will give you ivermectin for head lice and scabies, but if you've got COVID, you're out of luck.
So how can people get hold of it if they need it?
Well, I know that it's not a rare or expensive compound. It's widely used in veterinary medicine, and it's I've heard that in some countries where it's very suppressed, people have been using veterinary formulations like the horse paste.
Is that available in Australia?
It's available globally, but we shouldn't have to rely on that. But such as the state of the Western treatment options, that we're being people are just doing whatever they can to find a safe source of ivermectin, waiting for sanity.
And has ivermectin been available for a long time and considered safe?
Yeah. Ivermectin is there's a spectrum of safety from water, say, which can kill you if you get too much water too fast, but we don't consider water toxic, pure water, all the way to, say, dioxin, which is very, very toxic, and a tiny drop on the skin will, just a few molecules will be fatal. And we know from the decades and decades of adverse reaction data that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are closer to water in terms of toxicity than Panadol.
Really?
You know, Panadol kills aspirin. Panadol, aspirin kill way more people than ivermectin. Hep C. Vitamin C. Vitamin C. I saw once that it was actually more dangerous than.
So we're talking about a very, very safe treatment.
Yes.
So ivermectin maybe monthly or something like that, a dose monthly.
It varies in the zone what variant is and what your risks are, and it's not one. I have to highlight, we're not talking one agent. Again, like Thomas Brody, you have a protocol of agents that together give. You shouldn't rely on one agent, even ivermectin, although it's a very powerful agent. You should still be doing other things
like the berries and
like the vitamin D, the zinc, the quercetin, melatonin, and there are other things you can add if you get unwell.
How do you take melatonin?
Sublingually, or as a capsule or tablet.
How often would you take it to keep safe?
In the prevention protocols and early treatment protocols, they say give it at night because it causes sleepiness, or it helps you sleep, which is wonderful, you know. So you take it at night, and it helps you sleep, and it's a powerful antioxidant. You know, bats, who are hosts of a lot of these coronaviruses, the beta coronavirus, they have very high levels of melatonin, and they don't get sick with all these same viruses. You know,
so they've worked it out.
So it's interesting, you know.
Okay, so I guess the good news is that we can fix this if we spread the word about effective early treatment and pre-treatment, rather than rely on so-called vaccines, which don't seem to be working in other countries at high vaccination rates. So we can't really hope for them to save us in Australia.
That's why I got vocal on social media, which got the attention of the medical board, which led to my suspension for talking about early treatment.
So yes,
because it's the information that will protect people. These are really simple approaches that we can do. And if the government and our authorities aren't, I just want people to be armed with the information they need to protect themselves. And we'll continue to fight them in the courts and politically, but you don't have to wait for that. You don't have to wait to stop complying with idiotic policy that could kill you.
All right. Well, thanks very much. I think that the tide is slowly turning in terms of information availability, but we want to save as many people as possible from taking the wrong treatment, hoping that it will solve their problems where they might be exposing themselves to dependency on ongoing vaccination. And as we know, even if a single dose doesn't have enough contaminants in it, several of them will surely
the cumulative effects is a concern. Yep.
be detrimental to your health.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Doctor.